Ask anyone to name the great powers of the ancient Mediterranean, and they'll probably cite Rome, Carthage, Egypt, and Greece. Yet there was another kingdom that profoundly shaped them all. It turned once neglected lands into a vast breadbasket that fed a city of 1 million. It fielded cavalry that decided the outcome of some of history's most famous battles, and for more than a century and a half it skillfully balanced between rival empires, until one fatal misstep sealed its fate. Numidia rose from the highlands of North Africa to become a Mediterranean power through strategic vision, agricultural innovation, and military excellence. This is its story. By the 3rd century BC, the territory of modern Algeria was divided between two rival Berber peoples, the Massili and the Masinissa. The Massili held the eastern highlands with their capital at Sirte, while the Masinissa controlled the western lands centered on Siga. These were not states in the modern sense, but loose tribal confederations in which authority depended on personal loyalty, clan alliances, and the military prestige of individual leaders. The Numidians spoke an Afro-Asiatic language related to other Berber tongues, while Punic, the language of Carthage, served as the medium of administration and trade. Both kingdoms existed in the shadow of Carthage. Sirte, founded around 300 BC by Carthaginian settlers, occupied a remarkably defensible position on a rocky plateau overlooking the deep gorges of the Rommel River. From the 6th century BC onward, Carthage established trading posts along the North African coast, and by the 3rd century, its influence extended deep inland, reaching as far as the Veste. The Numidians were semi-nomadic, moving seasonally with their herds, yet returning to the same encampments, poised between nomadic and settled ways of life. Their economy was based primarily on pastoralism, the herding of sheep, goats, and cattle. Along the coast and in more fertile areas, Numidian communities practiced settled agriculture more extensively, growing wheat and legumes and trading with Carthaginian merchants. Even so, the region was long seen as backward and unsuited to intensive farming. Numidian society was built around clans, each led by a chief who controlled land and key trade routes. Women managed the household, producing textiles, preparing food, and safeguarding supplies, and in effect sustained the family's internal economy. Men were chiefly occupied with herding and warfare. Herodotus notes that Numidian women wore distinctive dresses, goatskin cloaks, and tassel-trimmed pileless mantles worn over dyed garments, colored with madder. Social mobility within the tribal system did exist, but real authority rested on military strength, clan ties, and the ability to secure advantageous marriages. Both Numidian kingdoms supplied mercenary cavalry to Carthaginian armies. Polybius first refers to Numidian cavalry as part of Carthage's forces during the First Punic War. In time, these horsemen became famous as the premier light cavalry of the ancient Mediterranean. What made Numidian cavalry so formidable? It started with the horses themselves, small, remarkably tough animals, ancestors of the modern Barb breed. They could travel long distances on minimal fodder and needed little care. On campaign, riders simply let their mounts graze on whatever vegetation was at hand, giving the Numidians a major logistical edge. These horses were also known for their strong bond with their riders. The Numidians practiced a distinctive style of horsemanship. They rode without saddles or bridles, using only a simple rope around the horse's neck and a riding stick. Control came through voice commands, pressure from the legs, and subtle shifts in body weight. To Mediterranean observers, this level of mastery seemed almost unbelievable. Their equipment was deliberately light. Riders wore simple tunics or animal skins, while warriors of noble rank sometimes draped themselves in leopard pelts. Their weapons were limited to small, round leather shields, javelins as their primary armament, and short swords for close combat. Later, as a centralized Numidian kingdom took shape, some units adopted elements of Roman equipment, oval shields, helmets, and even chainmail for elite troops. as confirmed by archaeological finds from royal burials. Numidian cavalry tactics grew out of small-scale tribal fighting over pasture and water. On the battlefield, the Numidians mastered the art of wearing an enemy down. The riders advanced in loose formation, hurled javelins with deadly accuracy, and withdrew immediately, leaving no opening for a counterattack. They did not try to smash dense infantry formations like heavy cavalry. Instead, through repeated rapid strikes, they unsettled enemy lines, unraveled defenses, and coaxed opponents out of secure positions into reach of heavier forces. This approach proved devastating in decisive battles. At Cannae in 216 BC, Numidian horsemen attacked the Roman allied cavalry on the right flank, drove it from the field, and then, linking up with the Carthaginian heavy cavalry, struck the rear of the Roman infantry. This maneuver was a key factor in one of the worst defeats in Roman history. Roughly 50,000 Romans were killed in a single day. Beyond set-piece battles, Numidian cavalry was invaluable for reconnaissance, raids on enemy supply lines, and the systematic denial of resources. During Hannibal's Italian campaign, they were constantly used as scouts. In an episode described by Polybius during the siege of Acragas in Sicily in 261 BC, the Carthaginian commander Hanno ordered Numidian horsemen to approach the Roman camp to provoke pursuit. When the Romans rushed forward, the Numidians withdrew as planned, drew the enemy towards Hanno's main force, and then suddenly turned back, encircled the Romans, and inflicted heavy losses, chasing the survivors all the way to the defenses of the Roman camp. The limitations of Numidian cavalry became clear when it confronted heavier mounted troops without support. During Caesar's African campaign, a mere 30 Gallic horsemen once defeated a much larger Numidian force simply by keeping formation and exploiting their superior armor and weapons against lightly equipped opponents. Numidian warfare relied on coordination between arms. Infantry held ground, heavy cavalry absorbed or deterred enemy charges, and Numidian riders harassed the enemy from a distance, steadily eroding cohesion. Even so, the value of Numidian cavalry was so great that after the Punic War, the Romans retained it in separate units for centuries, the Equites Numidarum or Murarum. These troops appear on Trajan's column in the early 2nd century AD and continued to serve in the Roman army for generations after Numidia itself had become a Roman province. When the Second Punic War erupted between Rome and Carthage in 218 BC, both Numidian kingdoms were forced to make choices that would define their future. At first, the political landscape seemed clear. Masinissa, the son of Galla, chief of the Massili, fought on Carthage's side. In 206 BC, he was betrothed to the Carthaginian noblewoman Sophonisba, daughter of the general Hasdrubal Gisco, a marriage meant to cement the alliance. Syphax, king of the Masinissa, by contrast, initially aligned himself with Rome. These alliances soon proved fragile. After Galla's death in 206 BC, internal conflict weakened the Massili. Carthage decided that the large western kingdom ruled by Syphax was the more valuable partner and broke off Masinissa's engagement to Sophonisba, marrying her instead to Syphax. The move secured the support of the Masinissa, but deeply alienated Masinissa, now the leader of the Massili, who nonetheless remained loyal to Carthage for the time being. Meanwhile, despite early successes, the war began to turn steadily against Carthage. Roman forces under Scipio Africanus expelled the Carthaginians from Sicily and Spain and prepared for an invasion of Africa. As Rome's power continued to rise and Carthage slid towards irreversible decline, Masinissa approached Scipio with an offer to change sides, bringing his cavalry into Roman service. Scipio, fully aware of both the strategic value of such an alliance and Masinissa's proven military skill, accepted without hesitation. As a gesture of goodwill, he even released Masinissa's nephew, Massiva, from captivity to cement their new partnership. In 204 BC, Scipio landed in North Africa at the head of a Roman army, soon joined by Masinissa and his cavalry. Their first major success was the destruction of a combined Carthaginian-Numidian camp near Utica. The Romans in Masinissa then pursued Syphax all the way to Cirta. The fortress capital fell. Syphax was captured and sent to Rome, where he died in captivity. Masinissa emerged as the ruler of both the Massili and the Massiliae and placed the forces of both peoples firmly at Rome's disposal. When Masinissa entered Cirta as a conqueror, he found his former fiancée there, now the widow of his defeated rival. Ancient writers portray Sophonisba as a woman of exceptional political influence. It was she who persuaded Syphax to break his alliance with Rome and side with Carthage. Her powers of persuasion were so strong that after his capture, Syphax himself blamed his downfall on his wife, claiming that her ability to sway men had led him to ruin. Masinissa married Sophonisba immediately after the fall of Cirta, a decision that deeply alarmed Scipio Africanus. He had already seen how formidable Sophonisba could be in political maneuvering. Scipio feared that a woman who had once drawn Syphax away from Rome in favor of Carthage might now exert the same influence over Masinissa and undermine his new alliance with Rome. He therefore demanded that Masinissa hand Sophonisba over to Rome, to be paraded as a captive in a future triumph. Masinissa was left with an inescapable choice: betray his wife or risk his alliance with Rome. In the end, he gave Sophonisba poison to drink, recognizing that her loyalty to Carthage threatened his position as Rome's ally. The Roman landing in Africa and their early successes forced Hannibal to return from Italy with his army. On October 19, 202 BC, the armies of Rome and Carthage met on the plain of Zama, roughly a 5-day march southwest of Carthage. In this battle, Rome held a decisive cavalry advantage thanks to Masinissa's contingents. The defeat of the Carthaginian cavalry, followed by a joint Numidian and Roman strike into the rear of the Carthaginian army, decided the outcome. Carthage suffered a devastating defeat. Its most experienced troops were destroyed, and Hannibal himself escaped only at the last moment. In the aftermath, Carthage was forced to accept a peace treaty that was ruinously unfavorable. For the Numidians, the key provision was the ban on Carthage waging war without Rome's consent, while Rome formally guaranteed the independence of Masinissa's kingdom. Rome granted Masinissa authority over all of Numidia, both the eastern lands of the Massiliae and the western territories of the Mazzili taken from Syphax, and recognized him as king. For the first time, the Berber tribes were united under a single ruler. Thus, in 202 BC, the Numidian kingdom was born. Masinissa ruled from 202 to 148 BC, 54 years, and his reign reshaped the economic balance of the Mediterranean world. When he came to power, Numidia was seen as a marginal, largely untamed land. The Greek historian Polybius, who knew Masinissa personally and had spent time in Numidia, later wrote that the region once had been considered incapable of producing any cultivated fruits. Masinissa set out to overturn that perception. He introduced advanced Carthaginian farming practices, including crop rotation to preserve soil fertility, irrigation systems to manage water in arid regions, and the use of organic fertilizers. He also compelled many nomadic Numidians to abandon seasonal migrations and adopt settled agriculture. The result was a profound social transformation that fundamentally changed the Berber way of life. Where communities had once combined herding with seasonal farming, Masinissa's reforms decisively redirected the kingdom toward permanent, sedentary agriculture. He also dramatically diversified agricultural output. Wheat, especially high-quality varieties capable of rivaling the farmed grain of the Nile Valley, became Numidia's primary export crop. In 200 BC, the Roman army in Macedonia received more than 1,300 tons of Numidian wheat. 2 years later, the same amount was delivered to Roman forces in Greece. In 191 BC, the city of Rome itself received over 2,000 tons of wheat and 1,350 tons of barley, while Rome and Greece that same year took in 3,400 tons of wheat and 1,600 tons of barley. By 171 BC, deliveries to the Roman army in Macedonia had climbed to nearly 7,000 tons of Numidian wheat. Masinissa also introduced the cultivation of olives and grapes, crops previously considered exotic in the region. They took hold so successfully that, according to figures from 143 BC, just 5 years after Masinissa's death, olive exports from Numidia matched grain exports in volume. This agrarian revolution had far-reaching consequences. Economically, it made Numidia indispensable to Rome. The population of Rome was approaching 400,000, and the city became increasingly dependent on grain from North Africa. Egypt, the former Carthaginian territories, and Numidia together supplied up to 2/3 of the grain consumed by Rome. This dependence gave Numidia genuine political leverage. Roman politicians were careful not to antagonize Masinissa, knowing that any conflict could put vital grain supplies at risk. Socially, the shift from nomadic pastoralism to settled agriculture upended long-established ways of life. Long-extended families that once moved with the herds now lived in permanent settlements of stone or mud brick houses. The tribal and clan system endured, chiefs continued to control land and trade routes, but the economic foundations of society had changed. At the same time, these transformations were uneven. Many communities, especially in desert and mountainous regions, continued to practice traditional pastoralism despite pressure from royal authority. Masinissa also worked deliberately to integrate Numidia into the cultural world of the Mediterranean. He encouraged Greek merchants to settle in Numidian cities, bringing commercial expertise and connections to Eastern markets. He welcomed Greek intellectuals, including the historian Polybius, and sent his sons to Athens, where they studied philosophy, mathematics, and rhetoric. Masinissa maintained diplomatic ties with Hellenistic rulers to underscore his status as a fully legitimate Mediterranean monarch. In 179 BC, Numidia's agricultural surplus allowed Masinissa to make a conspicuous gesture of generosity. He sent grain to the Greek island of Delos, which was suffering from food shortages. In gratitude, the people of Delos erected a commemorative stele in his honor. In doing so, Masinissa cemented his reputation as the ruler of a civilized state. Cirta eventually evolved from a Carthaginian fortress into a major Mediterranean city. Its population was strikingly diverse. Alongside native Numidians lived refugees from Carthage who had fled after the city's fall, merchants from the Hellenistic world drawn by trade, Roman traders, and Berber settlers from beyond Numidia. This multi-ethnic mix turned Cirta into a major commercial hub, a truly cosmopolitan city where dozens of languages and cultures intersected on a daily basis. Other Numidian cities developed clear economic specializations. Banasa became a well-known center of pottery production. The port of Rusicade gave Cirta access to Mediterranean sea routes. Hippo Regius grew into a major coastal city, while Faveste controlled key inland-overland routes. Together, these urban centers linked Mediterranean ports with caravan routes running across the Sahara. On Numidian markets, grain and olive oil were traded alongside ivory, wild animals, and slaves. Although trade had long flourished in Numidia, the minting of native coinage began only under Masinissa. Numidian coins followed the Carthaginian monetary tradition. The basic unit was the shekel, weighing just over 7 grams of silver. There were also silver half and quarter shekels, as well as numerous bronze coins for smaller denominations. Numidian coinage commonly featured images of kings, horses, and elephants. Agricultural and commercial prosperity made large-scale construction possible. The imposing Madrakan mausoleum and the temple at Semitu reflect distinct Numidian architectural traditions that developed largely outside direct Punic and Roman influence. Numidian religious life blended several traditions. In Cirta, there was a sanctuary dedicated to Baal Haman, the Punic lord of the underworld, later identified with the Roman god Saturn. Votive stelae often bear the sign of Tanit, the Carthaginian goddess later reinterpreted in Roman tradition as Juno Celestis. The Carthaginian sanctuary and necropolis at El Hofra have yielded hundreds of funerary and votive stelae dating from the 3rd to the 1st centuries BC. These finds show how Carthaginian religious practices were adopted and adapted within the Numidian cultural setting. Alongside Punic cults, inscriptions also attest to local Numidian deities, Alisua, Iocolan, and Motbanius. Dio, Cassius, and Herodotus mention Numidian religious rites, including spells and charms believed to summon rain. These practices differed markedly from mainstream Mediterranean cults. Taken together, the Numidian religious life stands as a clear example as cultural synthesis, combining indigenous Berber beliefs with Carthaginian traditions and later Roman influences. In the final decades of his reign, Masinissa's relationship with Carthage grew increasingly hostile. The peace treaty of 201 BC barred Carthage from waging war without Rome's consent, effectively giving Masinissa a free hand to expand at Carthage's expense. He exploited this ruthlessly, launching repeated border incursions and pressing ever new territorial claims. Carthage was trapped: accept the loss of land or resist and violate its treaty with Rome. For years, the Carthaginians swallowed these provocations, fully aware that they were in no position to face another war with Rome. In 151 BC, Carthage finally chose to respond to Masinissa's provocations by force, providing Rome with the pretext it needed to declare war. In 149 BC, Roman armies landed in Africa. Masinissa, already in the twilight of his life, greeted their arrival without enthusiasm, likely sensing that Roman domination would one day threaten Numidia as well. As a result, Numidian forces did not actively support Rome during the Third Punic War. Masinissa died in 148 BC without breaking his alliance with Rome, but also without living to see the war's outcome, to which he himself had contributed in no small measure. In 146 BC, Roman forces under Scipio Aemilianus captured Carthage after a 3-year siege. The Romans systematically destroyed the city, burning its buildings and tearing down its walls. Thousands of Carthaginians fled to Numidia as refugees, bringing with them valuable knowledge and skills. The former Carthaginian territories were turned into the Roman province of Africa. After Masinissa's death, Numidia was divided according to his will among his 3 eldest sons. Micipsa received the palace and treasury at Cirta, effectively becoming king. Gulusa took command of the Numidian army, and Mestanabal was entrusted with judicial authority. This threefold arrangement was meant to prevent civil war by balancing power among the heirs. Within a few years, both Gulusa and Mestanabal died, and by around 145 BC, Micipsa was left as the sole ruler. He reigned until 118 BC, largely continuing his father's policies. Micipsa remained a loyal ally of Rome and oversaw Numidia's economic development. Grain and olive oil continued to flow to Rome, Numidian cavalry fought alongside Roman armies, and the kingdom itself remained prosperous and stable. Yet Micipsa faced a problem that would ultimately prove fatal. That problem was Jugurtha. Jugurtha was the illegitimate son of Mestanabal, and thus Masinissa's grandson and Micipsa's nephew. Ancient authors portray him as a man of exceptional qualities, physically strong, handsome, and above all sharp-minded. He shunned luxury in favor of an active life, spending most of his time in military training, athletic contests, and hunting. Jugurtha quickly became immensely popular among the Numidians. His charisma and physical prowess marked him as a natural leader. At the same time, Micipsa had 2 legitimate sons, Hyamsphal and Adherbal, both considerably younger than Jugurtha. Aware of the threat Jugurtha posed to his son's inheritance, Micipsa sent him to command Numidian contingents fighting alongside Rome during the siege of the Iberian city of Numantia, hoping that Jugurtha would be killed. The plan failed completely. Jugurtha distinguished himself in battle and made a strong impression on the Roman commander Scipio Aemilianus. More importantly, the campaign gave Jugurtha deep insight into Rome itself. He observed Roman military tactics, studied its political system, and identified what he saw as its greatest weakness: pervasive corruption. He was later said to have remarked, "A city for sale doomed to perish as soon as it finds a buyer." Scipio was so impressed by Jugurtha that he wrote to Micipsa recommending his adoption. Under pressure from Rome, Micipsa adopted Jugurtha in 120 BC. When Micipsa died 2 years later, his will divided Numidia into 3 parts between Hyempsal, Adherbal, and Jugurtha. Micipsa likely hoped that Roman oversight would prevent civil war. He was mistaken. Jugurtha moved swiftly. His warriors stormed Hyempsal's quarters, killing anyone who resisted. On Jugurtha's orders, the young prince was seized and beheaded. One of the heirs was eliminated just weeks after Micipsa's death. Adherbal, realizing he would be next, raised an army, but Jugurtha defeated him in open battle, forcing him to flee to Rome and appeal to the Senate for protection. There, Adherbal accused Jugurtha of fratricide and the seizure of power, demanding justice. In response, the Senate dispatched a commission to Africa, led by the former consul Lucius Opimius, tasked with fairly dividing Numidia between the two rivals. Well-versed in Roman corruption, Jugurtha lavishly bribed Opimius and the other commissioners. In 116 BC, the arbitration awarded Jugurtha the western, more developed and fertile part of Numidia, where Adherbal received the eastern territories. In 113 BC, Jugurtha renewed the war against Adherbal, besieged him in the capital Cirta, and waited to see how Rome would respond. Adherbal sent desperate pleas for help, but the Senate limited itself to diplomatic missions that tried to pressure Jugurtha with words alone. Jugurtha deliberately stalled negotiations until, in 112 BC, he finally captured Cirta. When the city fell, Jugurtha personally tortured Adherbal to death, and then carried out a massacre among the inhabitants, including the execution of all the Roman merchants who had taken part in the defense of Cirta. This created a crisis that no amount of gold could resolve. Roman citizens had been killed. A wave of outrage in Rome forced the Senate to act, despite the many bribes Jugurtha had handed out. In 112 BC, Rome declared war. The Jugurthine War, which lasted 7 years, exposed deep military and political weaknesses within the Roman Republic. Jugurtha waged guerrilla warfare with great skill, withdrawing into mountain and desert strongholds that large, heavily armed Roman legions simply could not reach. He exploited his knowledge of the terrain, the support of the local population, and his forces' superior mobility, turning these advantages against the rigidity and slowness of Roman armies. At the same time, Jugurtha continued to corrupt Roman commanders. In 111 BC, the consul Lucius Calpurnius Bestia led a Roman army into Numidia, but quickly concluded a peace without achieving any military success, in effect accepting Numidian gold in exchange for his compliance. The suspiciously generous terms of the agreement provoked outrage in Rome. The Senate summoned Jugurtha to the capital under a guarantee of safe conduct, ordering him to testify about the bribery. Jugurtha arrived in Rome confident in the strength of his connections, yet before he could address the Senate, the tribune of the people, Baebius, likely bribed by Jugurtha himself, vetoed the proceedings. Jugurtha was silenced and prevented from naming the senators he had corrupted. While enjoying diplomatic immunity in Rome, Jugurtha then made a fatal mistake. Masinissa, a grandson of Micipsa and another potential claimant to the Numidian throne, was in the city. On Jugurtha's orders, he was assassinated. When the killers were arrested and Jugurtha's involvement became undeniable, public opinion turned decisively against him. The war was renewed. In 110 BC, the consul Spurius Postumius Albinus led Roman forces into Numidia, but soon had to return to Rome for elections, leaving command to his brother Aulus. Aulus Postumius Albinus proved no match for the seasoned Jugurtha. The Numidian king lured the Roman army into a trap and forced it to surrender. An entire Roman force was compelled to lay down its arms, pass under the yoke as a mark of humiliation, and withdraw from Numidia within 10 days. Acting in Rome's name, Aulus Postumius Albinus recognized Jugurtha as ruler of Numidia for life. When the news of this reached Rome, outrage was boundless. the Senate turned to the capable and experienced commander Quintus Caecilius Metellus, appointing him to lead the army and take revenge on Jugurtha. Metellus reorganized the demoralized forces, restored strict military discipline, and launched a systematic campaign to subdue Numidian strongholds. Even so, Metellus failed to capture Jugurtha himself. The Numidian king skillfully played for time, making feigned offers of surrender, continuing to bribe senators, and avoiding decisive engagements. Despite steady gains in cities and territory, the campaign dragged on. One of Metellus' subordinates, the ambitious young officer Gaius Marius, appealed directly to the Roman people. He publicly accused Metellus of deliberately prolonging the war and demanded that command be transferred to him. Riding these accusations and his promise to end the war quickly, Marius won election as consul for 107 BC and assumed command of the army. He brought with him a reorganized, tightly disciplined force and began the methodical destruction of Jugurtha's strongholds. Yet even Marius failed to capture Jugurtha himself. Jugurtha's father-in-law was Bocchus I, king of the neighboring Mauritania. For years he had supported his son-in-law in the war against Rome. By 105 BC, however, watching Marius' steady advance, Bocchus realized that Numidia's defeat was inevitable. A young Roman officer, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, serving as quaestor under Marius, approached him with a clear proposal: betray Jugurtha and hand him over to Rome, and Mauritania would be left in peace, its borders preserved. Bocchus accepted the bargain. He lured Jugurtha to a meeting under the pretext of negotiations, seized him, and handed him over to Sulla. Betrayal by his own father-in-law brought the 7-year war to an end. In 104 BC, Jugurtha was led through Rome in Marius' triumph. The crowd jeered as the chained king was marched through the streets he had once walked freely under guarantees of immunity. He was executed by strangulation, the customary fate of defeated enemy commanders and kings. After Jugurtha's death, western Numidia was added to the domains of Bocchus I. At the same time, Gauda, another son of Masinissa, who had remained loyal to Rome, was granted control of central Numidia. Shortly after Gauda's death, his sons Hyamsul II and Iarbas divided the kingdom and ruled under Roman protection. The region remained economically vital. Rome's grain supply continued to depend on North African agriculture, but Numidia's days as a true political power were over. The final end of Numidian independence came amid the turmoil of Rome's civil wars. In 49 BC, King Juba I was forced to choose a side, Pompey or Julius Caesar. He backed Pompey, convinced that the seasoned commander, supported by the Senate, would inevitably prevail over his ambitious rival. The choice proved fatal. In 48 BC, Caesar crushed Pompey at the Battle of Pharsalus, and in 46 BC he invaded North Africa, confronting the Pompeian forces, which included Juba's Numidian troops, at the Battle of Thapsus. The battle ended in a decisive defeat for the Pompeian cause. Juba took his own life rather than be taken captive. Caesar immediately annexed eastern Numidia, transforming it into a new Roman province, Africa Nova. After 156 years of independence, the Numidian kingdom ceased to exist as a sovereign state. Under Roman rule, the region was repeatedly reshaped administratively. In 25 BC, Octavian merged Africa Nova with Africa Vetus, an older province centered on Carthage, to create Africa Proconsularis. For a brief period between 30 and 25 BC, Juba II, the son of Juba I, ruled as a client king over the lands of the former Africa Nova, but his authority was largely nominal. Real power lied with Roman officials. Roman Numidia became one of the most urbanized regions of North Africa. The landscape was covered by a dense network of cities. Key centers included Cirta, Rusicade, Hippo Regius, Theveste, and Lambaesis, linked by a system of military paved roads. Over time, as many as 20 cities were granted the status of Roman colonies. Agriculture not only survived under Roman rule, but expanded on an unprecedented scale. Large Roman estates, latifundia, spread across the countryside, owned by wealthy landowners and worked by slaves and tenant farmers. Traditional Numidian forms of landholding were steadily displaced by a plantation-style economy, while profits flowed to the Roman elite, financing monumental building projects throughout the empire. By the 3rd century AD, archaeological evidence points to a sharp rise in olive oil production. North Africa as a whole, including the former Numidian lands, became essential to sustaining the Roman Empire. In the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, the region supplied up to 2/3 of the grain consumed by Rome, securing its reputation as the empire's breadbasket. The material remains of ancient Numidia are still scattered across North Africa today. Constantine, once Cirta, still stands on a rocky plateau above the gorge of the Rummel River. Timgad preserves the broad ruins of a Roman military city. Lambasis, Hippo Regius, and other sites continue to shed new light on Numidia and Roman North Africa. In modern Algeria and across North Africa more generally, Masinissa is remembered as a national hero and a powerful cultural symbol. He's regarded as the forefather of Berber identity, an embodiment of North African political unity, and a figure associated with resistance to foreign domination. Numidia never achieved the renown of Rome or Egypt. It built no Colosseum, raised no pyramids, and left few monuments that immediately capture the attention of a casual traveler. Yet at decisive moments, its influence on Mediterranean history was profound. Without Numidian cavalry, Rome might not have prevailed at Zama, and Carthage might not have triumphed at Cannae. Without Numidian grain, Rome's vast population would have struggled to survive. Without the Jugurthine War, which exposed corruption at the heart of the Senate, Roman politics might have taken a very different path. Small kingdoms can cast long shadows. If you made it to the end of this video, we really appreciate it if you liked and subscribed. Follow along on our journey through ancient civilizations and history. If you'd like to support the channel, join our Patreon or become a YouTube channel member. You get early access to new episodes, behind-the-scenes looks, and more. You can also leave a super thanks below to give us a little extra boost. If you want to listen to history on the go, check out our all-new podcast, Parabellum History. You can find it on all major podcast platforms. Thanks again for tuning in, and we hope to see you next time.